Usually I talk specifically about the Second Amendment, but today, because of the hot news item, and I have to talk about it on Fox News this weekend, I want to talk about this Texas versus United States fight down at the Rio Grande and some of the constitutional issues that you need to know about to make you the smartest person in the room. And yes, it's true, Joe Biden's administration is on the wrong side of the constitutional law. You'll see why when we get back. Hey folks, I'm Mark Smith, host of the Four Boxes Diner, proud American gun owner, constitutional attorney, member of the United States Supreme Court Bar, and author of Disarmed, What the Ukraine War Teaches Americans About the Right to Bear Arms. Check it out. All right, folks, I'm sure you've been reading a lot about this in the news. Down there in Texas, in the Rio Grande, on the border between the United States and Mexico, the state of Texas, has been putting up a razor fences, if you will, and other barricades to prevent illegal immigrants from breaking into this country in what they claim to be as a form of invasion. Now, the United States government is in a litigation with the state of Texas over whether or not the state of Texas can do this. Now, mind you, some of the critical facts here are that these fences, as I understand it, are on private property of Texas residents, where the Texas residents with this private property have consented to the installation of these razor fences and other barricades. So this is not on federal land. This is on private property owned by private citizens. And that's where these fences, these barricades are going up. So in the litigation between the state of Texas and the Biden administration, it went to the United States Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit, and the Fifth Circuit said that the federal government lacked the authority, and could not cut down these fences for various reasons, such as they're on private property and the state of Texas has a right to concurrently enforce federal immigration laws. So the Department of Justice under Merrick Garland and Joe Biden went to the U.S. Supreme Court on an expedited emergency basis. Keep in mind, this is an interlocutory appeal. You're very familiar with interlocutory appeals, which is an appeal that occurs in the middle of a case and not at the end of a case after a final judgment. This litigation is ongoing between Texas and the United States, and there's an oral argument, I believe, I think around February 7th. So this case is very much alive. It's not resolved. So it goes up to the U.S. Supreme Court on an application by Merrick Garland for an emergency stay, and unfortunately, in my view, in a 5-4 decision, Amy Coney Barrett and Justice Roberts went along with the three liberals and said, and this is key, very, very important to understand what I'm about to say here. They said that the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals decision that said that the federal government was not permitted to cut the fences or remove the fences was not allowed. Specifically, what the 5-4 ruling held, and it's very important to understand what it said and what it didn't say. It said that the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals could not enjoin the federal government from stepping in and removing those fences or messing with those razor fences. What the order did not say was that the federal government had to remove the fences. What the Supreme Court 5-4 order did not say was that Texas had to remove those fences or that Texas had to cut those fences. Do you see the distinction? The Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals decision could not prevent the federal government from stepping in and doing what it needed to do with the fences if it so chose, but nothing required Texas to act or not act or stop acting in any respect. So Texas right now is legally allowed to keep those fences up, and if the federal government wants to try to remove those fences, they can do so, and the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals decision that had previously prevented the federal government from acting to take down the fences, that is not a basis to prevent the federal government from acting. That's all that Supreme Court decision 5-4 said. I'm not saying I would have ruled the same way. I probably would have been with the Kavanaugh, Thomas, Alito, and Gorsuch dissenters if I were on the Supreme Court, but I'm not. So with that said, that is the reality of it. So nothing actually requires Greg Abbott in Texas to remove the fences right now. The Supreme Court did not require it. They simply said the Fifth Circuit cannot prevent the federal government from trying to do what it needs to do on the ground. That's all it said, which, by the way, in many respects is very consistent with even massive precedents going back many years, including during the Trump administration, that when it comes to our border, generally speaking, the federal government is responsible for protecting the borders. And this is where it's going to get a little fuzzy in a minute, and you'll see why. So that's where we are right now. So now what to understand happened next. So Greg Abbott, and now we're going to get constitutionally geeky. So Greg Abbott and the governor of Texas came out and pulled a very creative move, and in my view, very straightforward move in many respects, and said that the Biden administration should not be allowed to cut the wire, and they should be able to keep the wire up because they are subject to an invasion. Specifically, what Governor Abbott is essentially arguing is that under Article 4 of the United States Constitution, it is the job of the United States federal government shall protect each state against invasion. That's right. The United States government, remember, the whole purpose of the federal government is to protect Americans in the country against foreign invaders. That is a primary purpose of the whole reason why we have a federal government. Again, Article 4 says exactly this. Article 4 of the U.S. Constitution says the United States shall protect each state against invasion. And Texas right now is arguing that the Biden administration is simply failing to do its job because it's allowing illegal aliens to invade this country unchecked. If anything else, they're saying that Joe Biden is literally rolling out the welcome mat, which is utterly lawless. And I think the way that Greg Abbott has framed this issue down there as the governor of Texas is absolutely correct. He's saying that if anyone is acting lawlessly, it is the Biden administration that's sworn an oath to uphold the United States Constitution and the laws of this great country. And at a minimum, they are violating Article 4 of the U.S. Constitution that says, again, the federal government under Joe Biden shall protect each state against invasion. And of course, it is clearly illegal to break into this great country illegally. You cannot do that. You cannot come across the border illegally without permission. That is a crime. You cannot stay in this country without permission. That is a second crime. And if you go out and work as an illegal alien, presumably with some fraudulent alias or something like that, a fraudulent social security number, or you're working illegally, that is a third crime. So you're literally encouraging people to come to this country, which breaking into the country is a crime in and of itself. Staying in the country is a second crime, and working in this country without, appropriate visas and without being allowed to be here in some likely fraudulent way, that is a third independent crime. And this is the population apparently the Biden administration thinks is great future Americans, and they certainly would be future Democratic voters in my opinion, but only time will tell. But let us carry on. So Greg Abbott is going back, and what he's arguing here is based on Article 1 of the U.S. Constitution that says that no state, and this is very important to understand this, it says no state shall, unless actually invaded, engage in war. Of course, this is phrased in the negative, so you could sort of conclude that this is not an affirmative grant of power to the states, but Texas has a very powerful argument that this language on its face allows it to use force to repel an invasion. It's unclear what engaging in war means, but certainly it seems to me that putting up fences, if you're allowed to actually engage in war, putting up fences and barricades to prevent an invasion is certainly well within the scope of that authority, because that seems a pretty de minimis approach to how one engages in war, which is simply putting up fences. But again, the key to understand all of this framing is that the Biden administration is simply violating the law. They are the ones that are engaged in lawlessness. It's not the governor of Texas, as I see it, who's simply trying to enforce the immigration laws that the Biden administration refuses to enforce. So when it comes to the rule of law, I think it turns out that the government of Texas has got on the side of rule of law, and the Biden administration is simply not. Now, it bears mentioning a couple things about this. Texas, again, is declared right now that it is being invaded. This is sort of a new theory or a new alternative argument that they've now advanced in response to this 5-4 Supreme Court decision, which had no opinion associated with it. And remember, it's interlocutory. It doesn't mean that at the end of the day, Texas is going to lose this case. It's just in the short run, the Fifth Circuit injunction against the federal government is not allowed to stand. They have not ruled on the merits. So the question is Texas engaging in war without the consent of Congress, which again, under Article 1, as you know, no state shall, without the consent of Congress, engage in war unless they are actually invaded or such imminent danger as will not admit of delay. So is actually Texas engaging in war? Well, if a state can engage in war without consent of Congress when it's invaded, it certainly has the power to take lesser steps that do not amount to the engaging in war. And I think that putting up fences is exactly that. Keep in mind, it has long been considered an essential attribute of sovereignty to be able to exclude people from your borders that have no right to come in, and if they break into the country, to the sovereign territory where they're an invader, they're illegally here. Now that applies both to the sovereign states of the Union as well as to the federal government. This power is really concurrent. In other words, what I mean by that is the power to prevent and to protect the country is not just exclusively in the hands of the federal government, it's also among the states as well as the people. Keep in mind the Second Amendment, the right of the people to keep bear arms shall not be infringed. If you look at the purpose of that, it's not just to check a tyrannical government, it's also to check foreign invaders, which is exactly what Joseph Story wrote about in the early 19th 19th century, where he discusses the role of an armed citizenry. So all of this is about protecting Americans and each other from foreign invaders. Now, I should also note, of course, that the actions by Texas in putting up a barrier of razor wire in a limited area along the border certainly does not seem to violate any federal statute that I'm aware of. Texas is merely exercising its own sovereign state power, which I can't see any way it's being prohibited other than it just irritates the Biden administration because they want to roll out the red carpet and allow illegal immigrants to break into the country and change the demographics of this country. So the next critical question is this actually an invasion that would authorize under the Constitution itself Texas to engage in this sort of act of war or these defensive steps? And I think any legal interpretation of what Texas is doing starts with the definition of what an invasion is, which is commonly defined as an incursion by a large number of people into a particular geographical space. And I think if you step back and sort of look at this at numbers, Texas has a pretty strong argument that this is a foreign invasion. I mean, just look at it alone. Texas alone has apparently dealt with approximately 2 million new illegal aliens during the Biden administration itself. 2 million people. That's 2 million people is larger than, how would that change the electoral demographics of this great country, right? And Texas alone has dealt with the 2 million people. And of those, many of those aliens come with other problems. They come with drugs, crimes. We don't know who these people are coming from. Are they part of Al Qaeda? Are they part of Hamas? Are they, part of a Chinese infiltrating army of, military-aged men? Who knows who these people are? There's no vetting or check on this. And under federal law, if you're not allowed to be here, you're supposed to be contained until a decision is made if you're claiming asylum or any of these things. But of course, these people are just, scattered throughout the country with some, hearing date to occur years in the future. And I doubt any of them are ever going to show up. So anyway, let's carry on. We also know we have this massive fentanyl problem. I mean, it's something like 27,000 pounds of fentanyl have been seized. That's just seized in the southwest border in 2023 alone. Think about that. That's what was captured, not what's gotten through all of our lines of defenses. And over 50 counties in Texas have declared that an invasion exists, and the Texas legislature has also allocated $11 billion to border security efforts. We also now know that there's, 25 total states are now standing alongside Texas saying this is an invasion, and indeed, something needs to be done. So, bottom line is, this does look to be like an invasion, and thus, because it's an invasion, guess what? Under Article 1, Texas has the authority to engage in some acts of war, and certainly it's a minimal act of war to simply put up barricades. So it seems like on the text of the Constitution, they're doing what they're allowed to do. Now, let me segue and just wrap up with whether or not Joe Biden can nationalize the National Guard down there in Texas and claim that they're federal troops and then tell them to stand down. I think that's a stretch, and I'll tell you why. If you just turn to the text of the United States Constitution, Article 1, let's look at the 3 reasons in the Constitution where the federal government can call forth the militia. Now, keep in mind, the National Guard is what's known as the organized militia. That is not the unorganized militia, which is you and me, which is a separate issue maybe we'll get to in a future video. But right now, we're just going to talk about the National Guard, specifically the Texas National Guard. So if you look at Article 1 of the U.S. Constitution, this is what it says. Quote, it says Congress, or the federal government, can provide for calling forth the militia to execute the laws of the Union, to suppress insurrections, and to repel invasions. Now, here is anything going on at the Texas border with the Biden administration. Would they be calling forth the National Guard to execute the laws of the Union? No, because they're literally inviting invaders into the country that are breaking into the country in violation of federal law. You can't come into the country without consent and permission, and these people are just economic migrants breaking into the country for the goodies this country offers. So no, that is not to execute the laws of the nation to call forth the National Guard in Texas. That would not be consistent with Article 1. Number 2, is it suppressing insurrection? Obviously not. There's no insurrection going on down there. These people are just breaking into the country. And last but not least, are they repelling invasions? Ha 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 ha! Just the opposite, right? Joe Biden is not trying to repel invasions. He'd be calling for the Texas National Guard to do just the opposite, which is to encourage the invasion, to violate his oath of office to protect the Constitution, including Article 4 of the U.S. Constitution that specifically says, as you know, that the United States shall protect each state against invasion. So it seems to me under Article 1 of the U.S. Constitution, guess what? That the Biden administration lacked the constitutional authority to call up the Texas National Guard and then tell them to stand down, cut the wire, and let all the illegal aliens in on a red carpet. All right, folks, hope that gives you a little bit of an overview. We'll be talking about this on Fox News over the weekend, I'm sure. And we will talk to you again soon here at the Four Boxes Diner. Make sure you subscribe if you don't already subscribe. And again, we keep talking about the Second Amendment too, but I thought this is an important enough topic. We better talk about it because it involves the Constitution. All right? And we will see you again soon here at the Four Boxes Diner.
Orders up. Table 2A.